Are you experiencing pain or suffering in some situation in your life? Well, today on Daily Renewal, we're going to reveal to you how God has a plan and there's a reason why we go through the things that we go through. Hello everybody, this is Pastor Lyle and welcome to Daily Renewal. We're going to continue our series on the abundant life. And if you've been following us on this series, if you haven't, I encourage you to look at some of the other videos. But I really believe that the key to living an abundant life is found in Galatians 5:22. And we see that is the fruit of the Spirit, is what it's called in the Bible. Love, joy, peace, patience or long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. If you have these things in abundance, there isn't anything on the outer part of your life, anything, external circumstances that can come in and get you off track. If you have an abundance of those things, then you're truly going to be living an abundant life. And so having said that, we've covered a few of them. And today we want to cover the topic of long-suffering or patience, depending on the translation that you're reading. It's really, we need to understand that God does understand and know the things that we're going through in our life. And, I've heard many people say, how come bad things happen to good people? Well, there's two things we need to establish. Number one, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and therefore there is no really good people. Despite what people might say, according to the Old Testament, we've all failed, and that's why Jesus had to come, so that we could be restored, and by his righteousness, we'd be restored with God. That's the first thing. But secondly, we have to understand that bad things happen to everybody. We have an enemy that does his absolute best, and that's Satan, who does his best to destroy our lives. He's jealous of us. Us, being human beings, we're made in the image of God. And again, we've talked about this in previous videos, but the fact that we're made in the image of God and he's a fallen angel, we're actually created on a higher level than he was. And he does have a form of authority here on earth. And the bottom line is he's trying to destroy every human life on the planet. So it doesn't matter whether you think you're a good person or not, bad things come at you. The great part about it is that God has a plan to use those things that were intended for evil, and it doesn't matter what it is. Romans 8:28 talks about the fact that all things work together for good for those who love God and are the called according to his purpose. So whatever situation you are going through today, whatever trial, whatever pain, we have to understand that God has a use for it. And so we want to discuss that today in the topic of long-suffering or patience. I've heard many people say, don't pray for patience because things in your life will all of a sudden start happening and it won't be pleasing. Well, I'll be honest with you. Like I said, we're gonna have stuff come at us anyway, but wouldn't we want things to break loose and happen in our life if that is something that is going to help develop something that's a God product in our life? So the idea of praying for patience is a good thing. Just because it may open the door to things, that's a good thing because those things may they help mold and shape us into what God has intended us to be. So, the idea of long-suffering or patience means to suffer long, to gird under pressure, or to gird up under pressure. It's considered persecution, distress, and trouble. The idea is to remain steadfast. God's desire through the pain that we experience is to help us remain steadfast. So in saying that, I want to talk about a couple functions of long-suffering. What are the reasons? What happens? What does long-suffering do in our life when we learn to endure? When we allow God to develop this thing in our life, develop patience or long-suffering. Well, the first thing that we want to look at, and we see this in Hebrews 12, starting at verse 1, it says, "Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. For looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So the first thing that we do see involving the function of long-suffering is this is something that God uses to develop endurance in our life. You know, I've seen many people over the years that have claimed to walk with Jesus or claim to be a Christian, and yet when trials and tribulations come, you really find out that most of their trust is still in themselves or in other people. God's desire is that we would lean on him when we're going through trials. And as we lean on him and as we trust him, as we go through trial after trial after trial, what that does is that creates an endurance within our life. And this is what God's desire is for us, to create endurance. We see where in 2 Corinthians 11:23-28, you can read this on your own, there was many trials that came at Apostle Paul: shipwreck, hunger, many people trying to destroy the message. He had the care of the churches upon him. And yet all of these things that contributed to Paul being a stronger believer, to the point where he was even in prison. And while he was in prison, and in one of the series we did on Philippians, we see that Paul had such a revelation of the importance of the gospel that even when he was in chains, things that people would have considered too hard for us to bear, he was more convinced that, you know what, forget about my chains. I'm fine. Even though I'm in physical chains, I'm not actually in chains on the inside. I'm still able to contribute while I'm here on this earth to what I've been called to do, and that's preach the gospel and encourage people in that. So Paul showed us in that particular portion, we have to understand that long suffering, if handled properly, develops endurance. The second thing we can see all through, especially the New Testament, but all through the Bible, the second thing, the function of long suffering or patience, is that it promotes unity. We can look all through the book of Acts and see how we know through history there was a persecution that came upon the church. And the more persecution that came upon the church, and we see this even in our time. Now in North America, if you're stuck in the bubble of North American church, we don't often get to see or understand that the greatest persecution in Christian history is right now. We have brothers and sisters in other countries that are actually being killed, they're being martyred for their faith. And even though we don't see it, we need to understand that that's happening. You know, in North America, and I'm not downplaying this, but I mean on the news, the biggest persecution we often face in North America is being ostracized because we won't bake a cake for somebody. Now, don't get me wrong, that is persecution. But we're not losing our lives yet over the fact that we will stand firm in our faith. There's many that have said, if you renounce Christ all through history, but even in our history right now, if you renounce Christ, we will let you go. And there's some that have the strength of the Lord. They know him well enough that they go, how could I ever renounce my Savior? They have this revelation that God has done such a work in their life. They know who he is. And as a result of the persecution that we saw in the early church, but if you see in some of these other countries you go to, there is a bond that is happening with a lot of these people that are going through heavy persecution. And we can see, if you talk to a World War II veteran, there's still some of those around. They'll tell you stories that happen, and with some of their platoon members that maybe are still alive today. There's a bond that was built through adversity that cannot be broken. And the many people in your life, as you've gone through many things, I'm sure, you'll find that those people that walk through things with you, there's a bond of unity that cannot be broken with the people that you walk through adversity with. So the second thing we see as far as what long-suffering or patience develops is it develops unity. And in this case with the church, as persecution comes to the church, it develops unity with those within the church. The third thing that we see as far as what long-suffering or patience develops in us, when we allow God to develop, that is, it enables us to obtain God's promises. And we see this in the book of Hebrews chapter 6. it says this in starting in verse 12. It says, do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience, again, patience and long suffering, inherit the promises. For when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. We have to understand that every test you go through, there's a graduation into the promise. We just have to endure. It's the same as when we went to school. At least when I went to school, they still tested. And the reason you had a test was so that you could advance to something beyond the test. Now, I've heard lots of different things about how different decisions on different places. For those of you in the States, maybe it's different. I don't know. But in Canada, a lot of the schools are even looking at taking away grades. And, as much as it's a turmoil when you fail a test, think about what it's like when you've studied and you've done everything you can. You've gone through the rigors and the turmoil of trying to prepare for a test. And then when you finally pass that test, the exuberance you have because you did something, you accomplished something. When you were in the middle of the studying, in the middle of trying to figure all this stuff out, it might have been tough. But, once you've passed the test, there's an exuberance that goes with that. And there's something that is developed in the struggle that goes on before you get through passing that test. And it's the same in life. And if there's any younger people listening to this, the real true tests, as tough as they were going through school, the real true tests begin when life starts after graduation. There's a hint for you, for those that are a little younger. Well, that concludes part 1 of our series on developing patience for the abundant life. Tune in tomorrow to Daily Renewal for part 2. And just a reminder, share these videos with everybody that you can, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're in the Kamloops area, be sure to check out River City Church. God bless you, and have a great day.